Aloha. Thank you so much for inviting me away from Rockford. Really, I'm the one who's blessed to be here on so many different levels, not just the obvious of the experience of this island, but I've literally met some of the most beautiful people I can imagine meeting, not just beautiful in countenance, but beautiful in character in these couple of days that I've been here. And I'd like to honor the work that you've done in a very short amount of time. Those of you who were here last year and who committed yourselves to going back to your community and implementing the things that you discussed, you've really done a tremendous job, and I'm honored to be in your presence. And I just want to honor you by saying thank you for being champions for your children and for your community. I also want to honor these two young men who spoke before us earlier today, Jonah and Malachi. What a wonderful job they've done. Let's give them another hand. I appreciate their willingness to come up and to chair these panels and to share their stories. It's not as easy as it would look, and they have tremendous, not only courage, but obviously we see so much in them that we're anxiously anticipating will come out of them in the years to come. Finally, I want to thank whoever is responsible for all the food you've been feeding me since I've been here. Every bite has been delicious, and I appreciate the fact that you have taken so much care and attention to make this stay of mine so pleasant. And finally, before I start talking, I'd like to honor the state superintendent who was here earlier. I know that to have a role like that and to take the time to come and to share in the community, that was a really gracious act, and I appreciate her for doing that. Everybody else I need to thank, I'll thank you personally, and there are so many I would like to thank just for how you've embraced me. Well, every event that I've participated in so far has been worth my trip here. And I really appreciate the work that has been done at the two schools that were highlighted and how they took the time to talk story with us yesterday and share how they are being used to transform their community. So I would like to share a little bit about my story, share a little bit about the story of the community in which I live, and hopefully help you to see the connections, that we really are brothers and sisters, and that the problems that you're facing are not unique to where you are. Wherever there's humans, there are going to be human problems. And where there are human problems, you can either be a part of the problem or a part of the solution. And so let me start at the beginning. I'm K. Edward Copeland. I'm the son of William Henry Copeland Jr. I'm the grandson of William Henry Copeland Sr. I'm the great-grandson of William Copeland, who was born in slavery. He was brought over here on a ship, and as the ship was about to anchor, as it was about to go into the harbor where it was to land, the ship caught on fire. My great-great-grandmother didn't know how to swim, but my great-great-aunt did know how to swim, so she jumped overboard, and she told my great-great-grandmother to throw my great-grandfather overboard. She caught him, and they never saw their mother again. My family somehow or another settled in Arkansas. My great-grandfather, slavery ended when he was around 13 years old. He stayed in that community and amassed a large amount of land, to the extent that if you go to Magnolia, Arkansas right now, the airport is on the land that my family leases them. The First Baptist Church there in Magnolia, Arkansas, is on land that my great-grandfather gave them, and the local high school is on land that he gave them. I bring that to the forefront right now because that helps to inform who I am, and I think about it a lot. When I face the challenges that I face now as a parent with children in the public school system, I periodically think about my ancestors and what they went through. And I share that story with my children on a regular basis. My grandfather was William Henry Copeland Sr., and there in Magnolia, Arkansas, one day he was going to visit one of our cousins. This was during the time where there were plantations, and somehow or another the cousin had broken one of the farming implements, and so the straw boss, the plantation manager, with his whip on his white horse, started whipping my grandfather's cousin, telling him that he's going to take the cost of that farming implement out in his hide. And my grandfather was there watching. He said, "You're going to take that?" And the man said, "I'll give you some too." So he lashed the whip out at my grandfather. My grandfather wrapped the whip around his arm, pulled him off the horse, and beat him with the end of the whip to the extent that he thought he was dead. And thus, that's how my family wound up in Louisiana. And that is still our homestead. My father grew up with those types of stories, to the extent that in the shotgun house that I've visited several times now, where my father and his 13 siblings were raised, there was a double-barrel shotgun that was positioned behind the front door, filled with buckshot, because there was a curious tradition in that part of the South where my father grew up, where individuals who did not necessarily care for particular people in the community would, for whatever reason, put on white sheets and then come riding through at inopportune times of the evening to wreak havoc and to instill terror. But my grandfather's admonition to my father was, there is no law against shooting ghosts. So he told him, if you happen to see some riding by, try to take out as many as you can. Now, I bring these stories up because these are the stories that came down to me, and they caused me to frame my world in a certain light and from a certain point of reference. These stories are true, and they had impact on my family. But when I was growing up, my father became a pastor, and eventually, having been born in Kansas City, Missouri, we eventually moved to Kankakee, Illinois. Kankakee sounds kind of Hawaiian, doesn't it? I mean, there's a lot of K's in there. We moved to Kankakee. Matter of fact, this is just an aside. When I first went to law school, one of the people asked me, when they saw me, so, well, where are you from? I said, Kankakee. They said, well, and where is that island? I said, well, it's about 50 miles south of Chicago. But anyway, we moved to Kankakee, and having come from a small community, Elwood, Kansas, population 800, where there was only one elementary school, one middle school, one high school, and everybody knew all the teachers. I knew where Miss Gwartney lived. I knew where Miss Sherlock lived. We could go to their houses after school. They could see us in places other than school and chastise us. And then we got another whipping when we got home because they had to give us a whipping. Having come out of that element, when we moved to Kankakee, Illinois, the second semester of my fourth grade year, the kids in Kankakee, Illinois were doing in fourth grade there in the class that they first put me into. They were doing there in fourth grade what I had been doing in second grade. And so I told my mother, and she said, that's not right, and thus began public school activism in my family. Because I don't know how it is in Hawaiian culture, but in African American culture, one person you do not want to cross is an African American mother. And so it's worse than a Jewish mother. My mother went up to the school, come to find out what was happening in retrospect, I was being tracked. That's what they called it back then. The schools have been desegregated, but yet they were segregated within the school. So that in the class that I was in, it was all African American. My mother came up, raised heck, and told them what they were going to do, and they put me in another class where I was the only African American. And literally from fourth grade through 12th grade, except for my classes in African American studies, I was mostly the only African American male in 85 to 90% of my classes. So, you say, well, big deal. Thank you for talking story with us. What does this have to do with anything? I wanted to give that framework so you can understand why I'm involved in what I'm involved with and what sacrifice I've had to make as it relates to processing my story differently so that I can move forward in a productive way. So I moved to Rockford, Illinois in 2001. When I got there, Rockford, Illinois was just coming out from under a consent decree, out from under a judicial sort of mandate, judicial strictures that had been placed on them because there had been a lawsuit in Rockford, Illinois that had been raised by various parents of minority students. And to make a long story short, you can Google the rest. The opinion from the U.S. magistrate as it relates to Rockford is famous now because the first line says something to the effect, and I'm paraphrasing it right now, that the public school district in Rockford has engaged in subtle forms of discrimination, but they've also done it in such a way that really Rockford has raised racism to an art form. That's what I moved to. So you can imagine, given the stories that I've come up with, what my posture would be as it relates to moving to that community. That community, which is divided by a river called the Rock River, east side versus west side. That community that not only has racial tension, but social economic tension, that has some historical tensions based upon the patterns of immigrants who have come into the community. That community that has a negative self-image that even yet persists if you look at the lists that come out about most miserable cities and, you know, the worst places to live and all those types of things. Rockford typically makes the list. However, there's something that has happened in Rockford that I think that you would do well to learn some lessons from, because I've literally been changed as a result of the process. 2001, when I first got there, they had a particular superintendent of schools, and as is my habit, because having come up the way I did, I always have it stuck in my mind that God doesn't love anybody any more than he loves me. He doesn't love me more than he loves anybody, but if I can talk in my colloquialisms, I'm not really impressed by anybody. So my first order of business is always to go to the Grand Poobah and see what's going on, because if you're an elected official, I figure you work for me. I want to know if you're doing your job. So I went to the superintendent. What's going on? How can I help? What's this, that, and the other? Make a long story short, over these 13 years that I've been there, we've been through 5 superintendents. So around 2007, 2008, thereabouts, several of us in the community, a diverse cross-section of the community, got together and said, you know what, we need to figure out a better way. There has to be something that we can do so that we don't keep repeating this cycle, and so that we can actually get some traction as it relates to our public education system. Because at that point, there was so much rancor, there was so much bitterness, because you do understand that bitterness, and this is why I told you my story, bitterness can turn into generational attitudes that keep people from moving forward, because there is such a thing as vicarious trauma. That maybe it didn't happen to me, but it happened to my daddy, happened to my grandfather. And as they talk story with me, I start to take on that offense. If you're not careful, that bitterness in you can be passed on to your children and can hamstring you from actually making any progress for their sake. So around 2007, 2008, a diverse group of us, grand poobahs. You understand when I say grand poobahs, I'm talking about the people who have, the positions, the juice, and so on and so forth in the community, and people who are not grand poobahs, but who think they own the grand poobahs, like me. We got together and we had investigated charter schools and basically decided, okay, well, here's another tool that perhaps we can use. Had to go through a lot of rigmarole, and actually ultimately had to do some things on the state level because there's a sentiment in Illinois that Chicago is all that matters and the rest of Illinois is just a suburb of Chicago. So they get what they want and so on and so forth. But we got together and we said, we're going to get some charter schools, and we had to ultimately do some things that ultimately even changed the law in the state so that charter schools could be more available outside of Chicago. And that was a successful enterprise. We actually got about 3 charter schools chartered there in Rockford. But we knew going in that charter schools are not a panacea. They're not noni juice. They can't cure everything. Do y'all have... Is it? Oh, you all know about noni juice? I thought that was just in my... Well, never mind. We'll come back to that. And so after we got those charter schools chartered, we asked the question that I heard being asked here today. What's next? What can we do? Since we've convened this diverse group of people and we've actually done something that we think is going to make a difference, what else can we do? What's the next step? How can we keep the momentum going, and how can we keep this group at the table, maybe even expand the table so that we can help more kids? Not more kids. Excuse me. I said I wasn't going to get... We can't help more kids. We have to help all the kids. Every kid is precious. We sing it in my church. A lot of people don't believe it. Red, yellow, black, and white, they're all precious in his sight. I actually believe that. And so we said, we have to do something. Let's figure out something that is more designed to change the system, as opposed to doing sort of piecework. Because the system is sick. Because there was something about our system that the longer kids stayed in the system, particularly after 4th grade, the worse they got. I'm talking about in terms of academic achievement and all those types of things. There has to be something that we could do. So we commissioned Laurie Priest, who is here with me now, to investigate, to look out across the country, see if there is something out there, see if there's a community that has actually done something systematically, not just pockets, but systematically that has impacted their community, their system. And after tedious research and just a dogged determination to really uncover every rock and look behind every leaf, Larry Priest recognized that there was a model in Nashville. It was important that it was Nashville because the demographics of Nashville and Rockford were similar in terms of not just the size, but the racial makeup and some of the racial tensions that had been in their narrative. And there was this thing that they were doing in Nashville that was moving their graduation rates up, that was bringing the community together, and that was seemingly having a great impact. And so we started dialoguing with them, and I believe it was in 2009. We had a great big meeting where all their grand poobahs got in a room, and we had video conferencing, and all of our grand poobahs got in a room, and we listened to their story. We asked questions. And afterwards, we sat down and made a list of all the reasons it would not work in Rockford. Because that's part of the human dynamic, right? That those humans over there aren't like these humans here. Can I say this just as another aside? I see some of you look like my cousins, and so if no, seriously, so if I hug you a little bit extra tight, it's not that I'm trying to be fresh, it's just you remind me of my family. I mean that sincerely. So we made that long list, and then we kept mulling it over. Finally, after we had made the list and sort of looked at the things that we could change about that list, these are the barriers, are there ways we can overcome these barriers, so on and so forth. We walked through that whole process, and ultimately, I believe it was in March 2010, we got the grand poobahs who were willing. Can I say this just in passing? If you're waiting for everybody to get on board, you're never going to go anywhere. But there is a critical mass. There is a certain tipping point that if you can get enough people on the same page, and that's what we did in Rockford, Illinois, in spite of the legacy of dysfunction, the legacy of racism, the legacy of negative self-image, we got the grand poobahs together and we got a great big old piece of paper. We called it a memorandum of understanding. But basically we said, you know what? I'm paraphrasing now. We're not going to act a fool. We're going to treat each other with respect. You know, what we're doing is for the children, and so you got to leave your guns at the door. And we made everybody sign it in public. We still have it. We pull it out every now and then. And thus started this journey where Alignment Nashville helped to tutor us and give us, listen carefully, not a program, because I think I heard somebody earlier say programs come and go, grant cycles and the politics. We didn't need another program. We needed a tool. They gave us principles, structure, processes, and now largely through our staff and their staff working together, we now have some technology that helps to align all of this together. These principles have allowed us in the city of Rockford to really make a corner. Now, it's very important that you understand what I just said, and that is, we didn't buy into a program, we bought into a different way of thinking and brought into some tools. See, Batman doesn't have any superpowers. He just got a great utility belt. And so, as a community, we stopped waiting for Superman to come and save us. We decided, you know what, if we get the right tools that will help us to have regular and honest conversations in a safe place. Is that not what Mr. Rollins said? Tools that will help us to line up in such a way. See, Bruce Lee never weighed more than 145 pounds at his max. He's 5'6", 145 pounds when he was like overweight. His usual fighting weight was like 136 pounds. But Bruce Lee could an inch away from somebody, punch them, and knock them back several feet. How could he do that? It wasn't in the fist, it was in the fact that he had learned how to take everything from the back heel to his hip to his shoulder and focus it on one spot and knock somebody out. So what alignment does, now let me talk about the alignment story. I'm almost done. I'm going to leave some time for questions at the end. So what alignment does is what my chiropractor has done for me. My chiropractor, his name is Andrew Kong. He grew up on this island. I'm going to hopefully go see his father while I'm here. I go to him. I just went to him Friday. I go to him, and when I go in, he puts me on the table, and he pulls, and he pops, and he twists. And sometimes I say, Doc, you're killing me. And he'll say, no, Rev, I'm straightening you out. Why? Because when the body is aligned properly, you can get more work done easily. When the body is working as it's supposed to work, and when everything is erect, and when your posture is as it needs to be, then miraculously, some things that don't even seem like they're related start getting better. I started going to my chiropractor for sinus problems. Come to find out, once he started aligning me and doing what he does and all those types of things, and once I started eating right and he told me what to do, now all of a sudden, no sinus problems. Because the body is a unity. A community is a unity. And it's not until we get lined up correctly that we can actually move these heavy objects that are standing in the way of the success of our kikis. So we got together. We started using these tools and processes and structures. And it's been hard work. I'm the governing board chairman, which means I'm a cat herder. Because that's literally what it is. Because everybody comes with their own agendas. Everybody comes with their own stories. And so when I come to the table, I'm not just coming with me. Sometimes I'm coming with my daddy, my grandfather, my great-grandfather. And at times, I've had to, in this process, discipline myself to recognize that while I honor my ancestors, I'm at the table for my children. I'm not going to forget those stories. I'm going to honor those. I'm going to tell those stories as long as I live. But I submit myself to the discipline of a process of staying at the table, talking story, until we can work this out, because a good man leaves something for his children's children. So at Rockford, we've been herding cats. I got some big ones on the board. And sometimes it's hard to keep them together. Sometimes we have to challenge one another, accountability. But the idea is basically what you've done on a school level. We've taken the universal principles that you have discussed here, and we've turned them into a process by which we can actually make change. What do you mean, the lessons we learned here? One of the lessons that is very clear in the discussion that we've had thus far is that we need to honor the educational professionals. That is to say, the community doesn't come in and say, this is what we're going to do. No, we talk to the professionals and say, you have your hand on the pulse of what's going on. What do you need? How can we help? And then we're going to come around that and then provide solutions. Alignment Rockford, what we do is we provide solutions. We have a process and structure where, regardless of what the problem is, it's a structured way of keeping everybody at the table long enough until you can come up with an actual solution. So we start with solution design. We engage the community, and we have tools. Community engagement is art and science. But guess what? We got an app for that now. No. What the alignment process does, we have a way of inviting the community in so that everybody can find their place. So hands don't have to be feet, and ears don't have to be noses. Everybody can be the expert that they are in what they do. And then we help put it together. Like, do you remember Mr. Potato Head? The ears are supposed to go on the side, just in case you want to know. But sometimes in the community, it's like Mr. Potato Head. We have the ears trying to do what the nose is supposed to do, and so on and so forth. But we have technology now whereby, and not technology, just technology, but a process and a way of thinking whereby as we design solutions and invite the community in order to help work through those solutions, we pilot that situation, go somewhere and see if it works. And if it works, we scale it up. Once we scale it up, we turn it over to the school system to institutionalize. If, when we pilot it, it doesn't work, then we start from scratch. But here's the benefit of staying at the table. Even when things don't work, because you've had to stay at the table so long, you start trusting one another. And you can get some ancillary benefits out of learning how to trust. Even on the Alignment Rockford Governing Board, there are people who, absent our commitment to children, I don't think I would talk to. Matter of fact, I know I wouldn't, because of, again, my story, right? And the baggage that I bring. No way I would talk to this conservative person or this person or that person. But we have Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, east side, west side, so on and so forth, because it's all about the children. And the structure helps us to stay in place until we work through our issues and our baggage. Do you know everybody has issues, right? Don't look at me funny, you got issues too. You got baggage that you bring to the table, and sometimes we don't realize how that baggage is impeding our progress. That's why we need principles, structures. That's why we need accountability, so that we can help each other work through these various issues. So let me see if I can't bring this to a close here, because I did want to leave some time for questions, and I hope somebody's monitoring the time so I don't go too far. So I started out by talking about where do we go from here. We were where you were, and we decided that we wanted to try to find a way to deal with the whole system. Now, I would like to challenge you that you have started something beautiful here. For those of you who were not here last year, I know that perhaps this is a lot to process, but the point is that there are powerful people here who have done a lot of hard work that you need to plug into and find your place at the table, not as a disruptor, but first of all as a listener and a learner, so that you too can figure out where you fit in. But at the same time, I want to challenge you to keep telling your stories, because you've inspired me. I've gained much more in these few hours that I've been in your presence. Yesterday at the schools, and then even today. I've gained much more than what I could possibly give, and I really want to thank you for that. I really appreciate you for that. But guess what? There's a larger community of practice out here that Brother Crazy was explaining to us that you need to be a part of, and your story needs to be told in that larger story, but you need to be humble enough to listen to others and gain from us as a family of practice. 2 or 3 things I would like to share that, as I close here, that I think all of us need to continually work on, particularly in this community, this family of practice. One of them is taking our anger and turning it into productive passion. See, I told you about ships and people being thrown off ships and whips and all those types of things, not just as a history lesson, but that's the fire in my belly that keeps me going when I'm in a meeting with all the grand poobahs and they start getting on my nerves. Because humans get on your nerves after a while, right? But what keeps me going is my ancestors went through a lot worse. And I'm not going to drop the baton for my children just because I'm going to stay in a place of bitterness. I'm going to stay in a place of blame as opposed to a place of power that says, scoot over, let me at the table, and I'm going to show you how to fix this problem. That's my attitude. Misdirected anger, pointing fingers at other people, blaming everything on somebody never works. because that's the posture of victimization. See, if it's always somebody else's fault, whoever that somebody else is, if it's their fault, then that means I'm powerless to deal with it. But if I recognize I have a place at the table, that means I have to take responsibility, accountability, but then also I have a voice. Those who are most profoundly affected ought to have the most prominent space at the table, and I need to get to the table with my voice, again, finding a solution. So turn your anger into focused passion. Other thing I'd like to say is, in echo of what had been talked about earlier, we got to get away from just assumptions, biases, and prejudices and stereotypes and actually start looking at the data. Let whatever you do be data-driven so that, first of all, that just makes sense, but then so that as you have to go cross-cultural, as you have to explain things to other cultures, you have some type of metric that is shared that everybody can understand. It's real easy to stay in this place of, I know what's really going on, without taking the time to be humble enough to listen to what the actual facts are, and to get the actual data. Finally, I have a lot of sayings, I guess you can tell. And one of my sayings is, this ain't classical music, this is jazz. And what I mean by that is that in jazz, the melody line is assumed, but there's room for every instrument to do what that instrument does best. And because the melody line is assumed, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to sound the same way everywhere you go or every time you do it. But the timing, the key, the tempo, all of that has to remain the same. That's universal. But you have the freedom and you have the mandate to improvise, to make the music with the instrument that you have been given by God. See, flute don't need to sound like a saxophone. Flute just needs to be flute, saxophone be saxophone, trombone be trombone, right? And so, as whatever you decide to do, and I again want to stop right there by saying, I honor you for your work. You are beautiful people, you're powerful people, you're proud people, but this is just the beginning. You've just scratched the surface. Now's the time to put aside anything that would keep you from focusing on the children while you're honoring your ancestors. And let's move forward for a brighter future, because a good man leaves something for his children's children. Thank you for listening.
We have time for 2 questions for Reverend Copeland.
I'm sorry for taking so much. I'll stay afterwards if there's another question.
No, it was good, right? So 2 questions, and then we're going to move on to Miki after that with Kukui and Kamuela. So reflection on the panel. But 2 burning questions. Does anybody have one? Yes.
When I grew up and first started my educational process, I used to say the Pledge of Allegiance and the Our Father every day. My grandfather taught me about religion, taught me about God and spirituality, and gave me a moral standard to live by. Nowadays, I find that we can't even say anything remotely religious or about God or spirituality in schools. It's looked down upon. How can we change this culture?
Okay, this is a very good question. I want to thank you for asking that question. And I think that and this is my personal take on how we address that situation. I think that we have to recognize that our responsibility is to be salt and light, which means that in dark and unsavory places, very often God places us to be the change agent. And sometimes we want the change to come from up top, because that's where the oppression, or that's where the stricture, that's where the barriers are coming from. You can't pray in school, you can't say this, you can't say that. However, if we inculcate, if we practice with, if we train and teach our children in such a way that they recognize that no one can stop them individually and even collectively from praying and from talking about God as students, I think that's the better approach as opposed to trying to find a political solution. Now, I say that if you don't mind, the reason I say that is because that was a big battle when I was in school. But guess what? Our youth directors taught us, hey, nobody can stop you from praying, so guess what? We started a prayer meeting at lunch. And ultimately, that prayer meeting got so big, they started letting us have it in the auditorium. And teachers, would come and all those types of things. So back to the sort of underlying point that has been made thus far today, we need to entrust our Malachis and our Jonahs with the tools they need to start it from up, as opposed to just dealing with, Mr. Governor or Mr. State Legislator, you need to change this law. Forget the law. Nobody can stop you from praying, and nobody can stop you from talking about God if that's what's in you. But if we're waiting for the government to be the church, it'll never work. That's my personal take on it. Oh, we can say amen? I didn't know we could say amen. You were supposed to be saying amen all during my presentation. I didn't know. Yes,
So first of all, thank you. Very deeply inspiring. I just can't say enough to tell you that this is really great. I'm glad I came in at the right time. But the question I was going to ask you, and maybe it's more of an open-ended one, is you spoke a little bit about critical mass and people bringing their collective intelligence, whatever it is that they have to offer, and how we needed to sort of progressively leapfrog to get to change. And here in Hawaii, we have a lot of folks that have what I would call, there's a lot of positive deviants. There are a lot of folks that have ownership of the agenda, and certainly this is a great cohort representation of that. How do we get to that next step that you alluded to in terms of having, you've seen Hawaii, you've visited Hawaii, and perhaps some insights into that. So it would be very interesting.
Wow, that's an excellent question that I don't know that I have the complete answer to, and I think you're right, it's an open-ended question. Perhaps that's part of what the reflection will be. However, having said that, I think that there are communities of practice. You've heard of the community schools and all those types of things. Now you've been exposed to alignment. There are communities of practice that you need to not only investigate but interact with, so that as you take this energy and take this platform, take this table and try to find ways to expand it, that you can avoid some of the pitfalls. See, don't let our mistakes just be our mistakes. Learn from our mistakes. Come pick our brains, come learn from these other communities, and be open to the fact that the truth of the matter is these are human problems. I know that Hawaii has a certain flavor, and I know that there's dynamics within the grand narrative of the history from colonialism and all these types of things. I understand that completely, but at the same time, when you get done talking, humans are humans. And there's some universal truths that you can pick up from these various communities of practice that I think will be helpful as you sort of move forward. Again, if I can say this, I think one other thing I would add is you have to sort of differentiate between tools and models. So what I've been describing as it relates to alignment is like a tool. It's a tool, and once you understand the principles and the processes and the structure and all these types of things, you can use that tool to address other issues. So literally, right now as we speak, I'm getting emails as we speak, we're getting ready to do an alignment type activity around crime in our community. Because the universal truths about shared responsibility and having some type of baseline metrics that we all agree to, and everybody holding each other accountable and all those types of things, that will work in anything that you decide that you want to attack, but you need to discipline yourself enough to really get a handle on those universal principles. It's literally like working out. I started trying to go to, I have a member that goes to this thing called CrossFit. Are you familiar with this? It's brutal. The guy, he said, Pastor, come with me. You need to work out. Come with me to go to CrossFit. And they kill me every time I go there. I can't walk for like 3 days after each session. But the point is, the whole point behind the thing is you got to learn certain movements to do them correctly. And if you learn how to do them correctly, they're transferable. So if you learn how to squat properly, you can do certain other things properly. And so I would like to challenge you to get some training and some tools as it relates to just the dynamics of the process, as opposed to just trying to get a model and then just, slap it on top of, try to make it fit. Get a process, and then you'll be able to make your own jazz, and it'll sound Hawaiian.